At precisely 3:11 p.m., the heartbeat of Marrow's End faltered. The clock tower in the town square froze mid-chime, its bell hanging silent as if afraid to speak. Lila Voss had been crossing the street when the soundless moment hit. Cars paused, mid-turn. A bird hung in the air like a painting come alive. Her breath caught. The world itself had stopped breathing. Then, without warning, the ticking returned. The bird darted off. The bell finished its toll. But everything was wrong. The sunlight had deepened. Her shadow stretched longer than it should. The air felt older, heavy with a scent like burnt ozone and rain. She turned toward the shop window and froze. Her reflection stared back with silver strands of hair she didn't remember having. Behind her, the people in the square began to scream. Time, it seemed, had kept moving somewhere else. The air smelled of rain, though the sky was dry. Lila steadied herself, scanning the stunned faces gathering in the square. Some wept, some touched their hair or hands as though rediscovering them. A woman cried that her wedding ring no longer fit. A man fell to his knees, staring at wrinkles that had not been there before. Lila reached for her badge, grounding herself in its familiar weight, when she noticed Elias Thorne standing in the doorway of his clock shop. He looked older than she remembered, his posture bent, his eyes distant. She called out to him, but her voice felt muffled, swallowed by the air. "Detective Voss," he murmured, voice thin as paper. "You saw it too, didn't you?" The pause. And the passage. Lila nodded slowly, her pulse echoing the new rhythm of the clocks that had started ticking again, just a little faster than before. At Town Hall, chaos rippled like a storm in glass. Mayor Harlan Greaves barked orders to anyone who would listen, demanding updates from a power company that reported no outage, and from a meteorologist who swore the skies had been clear. Lila entered, brushing past trembling aides, her coat still wet from the strange mist that followed the event. Harlan turned to her, sweat glistening on his temples. "Tell me it was a hallucination," he said. "Something in the air. Something explainable." Lila shook her head. "If it was," she said quietly, "then we're all breathing the same madness." Behind them, a wall clock ticked too fast, the seconds devouring each other like they couldn't wait. That evening, Lila visited Maradoon's studio on the edge of town. The painter had been the first to call, insisting Lila see something. The studio smelled of turpentine and wilted flowers. Canvases leaned against every wall, each depicting the town square, each painted days apart. Yet in all of them, the clock tower read the same time. 3:11. Lila stood frozen. "I didn't know why I painted it," Mara whispered, her hands trembling. "It just kept coming to me in dreams. I'd wake up, and the brushes would be wet." The air between them pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of something unseen. Lila reached out and touched one of the canvases. The paint was still damp. Night settled over Marrow's End with unnatural stillness. The town's clocks ticked louder than before, their rhythm dissonant, too alive. Lila sat alone in her small office above the police station, the lamplight soft against the window. She played back the dashcam footage from her patrol car. The moment before 3:11, everything was normal. People walking, cars passing. Then static swallowed the image. When it returned, the shadows had lengthened, and the date stamp read 6 months ahead. Lila's breath hitched. Time hadn't just stopped. It had leapt. And somewhere in that missing span, something had happened that none of them could remember. She turned up the audio. Faintly beneath the hum came a sound like a heartbeat, wrapped in ticking. Morning came reluctantly, bleeding through a haze that felt more dream than dawn. The town square was silent again, though not from peace, more like exhaustion. Lila stood before the fountain, camera in hand, reviewing the photographs her team had taken after the event. Everything looked familiar. The same people, same positions, same strange stretch of shadows. But then she saw him, a figure near the base of the clock tower, face obscured, coat too dark for daylight. He hadn't been there before. Lila zoomed in, her pulse quickening. His eyes were visible just enough, pale, sharp, and knowing. A chill crept up her neck. Every photo taken before 3:11 showed the same figure, always near the edge of the frame, always watching. Yet, no one in town remembered seeing him. Elias Thorne was waiting when she arrived at his shop, the faint sound of ticking filling the air like restless breathing. He was pale, his hands trembling as he wound a pocket watch that refused to tick in rhythm. "He was here," Elias murmured before she could speak. "The man from your photograph, he came days ago, or maybe hours. He asked about the tower's mechanism. Said the town's heart was misaligned." Lila frowned. "Did he give a name?" Elias hesitated, then whispered, "He said he had none. Only a purpose." The watch in his hand suddenly began ticking backward. Both of them froze. The sound was gentle but wrong, like time rewriting itself. Mayor Greaves convened an emergency meeting that evening. Only half the town came. The rest had locked themselves inside, claiming the days felt too long and their memories didn't fit. Lila stood at the back of the hall, arms crossed, listening as fear rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted about the man with no shadow. Another swore they'd aged years overnight. Harlan slammed his gavel, shouting for order, but his voice broke. Lila watched him closely. He looked different too, his hands trembling more than before. When the lights flickered, gasps rose. For a heartbeat, everyone's reflection in the window aged decades, then returned to normal. The crowd fell silent. Even the clocks dared not tick. Mara Dune's voice trembled through the phone. "He's in the paintings, Lila. Every one of them." Lila raced to her studio, heart hammering. The room was different now. Colder, heavy, with the scent of turpentine and fear. Each canvas on the wall had changed. Where once the square had stood empty, the dark-coated stranger now appeared. Standing closer with every painting, his expression sharpening, almost human. Mara sat on the floor, her fingers stained with paint she swore she hadn't touched. "He's painting through me," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. Lila turned toward the newest canvas. The stranger was no longer in the background. He was standing behind Lila's painted figure, hand reaching toward her shoulder. That night, Lila spread the photographs, paintings, and police reports across her office floor. Each one told the same story. A man appearing before 3:11, unseen by all, present in everything. She overlaid them, aligning buildings, streets, angles. The stranger's position traced a spiral, each image marking a step inward toward the clock tower. At the center of it all, the town's heart, sealed for decades. The ticking of her office clock faltered, matching her breath. Lila whispered to herself, "He's not in the photos. We are in his." Outside, the wind rose, carrying the faint echo of gears turning beneath the town. Somewhere in the distance, a single chime rang out. 3:11. Again, the wind howled through Marrow's End as if the sky itself were whispering warnings. Lila approached the clock tower just before midnight, her flashlight cutting through the fog that pooled like breath at her feet. The tower's gears moaned faintly behind its stone walls, alive in a way that no mechanism should be. At its base, she found a heavy iron door half buried beneath vines and rust, its hinges etched with symbols that pulsed faintly when touched. She knelt, pressing her ear to the cold metal. A sound met her. Not ticking, but something deeper, organic, like the pulse of a living thing. As she forced the lock, time seemed to stutter. The moon blinked. Her watch skipped a minute. When the door groaned open, warm air spilled out from below, carrying the scent of old rain and iron dust. The staircase wound downward for what felt like hours. Each step echoed differently, as though sound aged between walls. Lila's flashlight flickered over engravings carved into the stone. Spirals, hourglasses, faces half erased. The air thickened the deeper she went, and a soft ticking began to accompany her every step, syncing perfectly with her heartbeat. At the bottom, she found a circular chamber bathed in amber light from no visible source. Gears the size of doors turned slowly in the walls, slick with oil and time. In the center stood a pendulum suspended over a pit of shimmering darkness. Lila's breath caught. It wasn't made of metal but of glass, filled with swirling golden sand that moved upward. When her reflection met its surface, her face aged and reversed in rhythm with the swing. Time, alive and breathing. She heard footsteps above her, measured, deliberate. The stranger descended slowly, his coat whispering against the stairs. Lila drew her pistol, the sound absurdly small against the heartbeat of the tower. "Who are you?" she demanded. He stopped at the last step, eyes pale and endless. "I am what they built to remember," he said softly, "and what they forgot to stop." He gestured toward the pendulum. "When they wound it, they tied themselves to its rhythm. But the clocks grew hungry." His voice was calm, almost mournful. "Time is not a measure, detective. It's a debt." The pendulum stilled. Every clock above them seemed to hold its breath. Elias arrived moments later, gasping from the descent. His lantern swung wildly, casting frantic shadows. "I couldn't stay away," he rasped. "I heard it calling again." The stranger turned toward him, something like sorrow crossing his face. "You wound the heart," he said quietly. "You made it breathe." Elias stumbled closer to the pendulum, shaking his head. "I only repaired what was broken." "No," the stranger replied. "You repaired what was meant to die." The pendulum shuddered, its sand reversing direction violently, spilling golden light across the floor. Lila grabbed Elias, pulling him back as cracks split through the gears. The chamber groaned like an awakening beast. Above them, the bell began to toll. Slow, mournful, infinite. The pendulum exploded in silence. Time fractured into light. Lila felt herself pulled through memories not her own. The birth of the town, Elias's first clock, Mara's brush on canvas, 1,000 moments collapsing into one. The stranger stood amidst it all, dissolving into streaks of light. "Someone must keep it," he whispered, "until it learns mercy." His voice faded, and so did he. Lila fell to her knees, clutching her chest. The sand settled around her like snow. Slowly, the gears stopped turning. When she rose, the chamber was quiet again. Her reflection in the cracked pendulum looked back. Older, yes, but steady. Above ground, the clock tower resumed its ticking. Only now, it followed her rhythm. When Lila surfaced from beneath the clock tower, dawn was breaking in uneasy shades of violet and gold. The square was deserted, every window shuttered, every street silent but for the faint ticking that now followed her wherever she walked. Her phone vibrated with dozens of messages, dates, timestamps, all wrong. 6 months had passed since 3/11. Her chest tightened. She entered the police station to find dust on her desk and a calendar flipped to November. The coffee in the pot had turned to stone. Her nameplate was gone. Someone had carved words into the office door. "We kept living." Lila's knees weakened as she realized. Marrow's End had moved on without her, and she was the only one who remembered the pause. Mara Dune answered her door with trembling hands. She looked older, shoulders curved, eyes rimmed with sleepless purple shadows. "You disappeared," she said, voice hoarse. "Half a year, Lila. You just vanished." Inside, her paintings told a story Lila could barely breathe through. The stranger appeared again and again. guiding people through the streets, standing beside the mayor, comforting crying children. He kept us calm, Mara whispered. He told us time had reset, that everything lost would return. She looked at her own reflection in the paint thinner's mirror-like surface. But it didn't. We grew older. Only he stayed the same. Lila touched the nearest canvas. The stranger's painted eyes stared back, alive and unblinking. Mayor Greaves' office was locked when Lila arrived, but she found him in the records room, hunched over yellowed documents. He jumped when she entered, eyes sunken, beard unkempt. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered. "You weren't supposed to come back." He laid out photographs, images of celebrations, funerals, children growing taller. "We lived those 6 months," he said, voice shaking. "But we can't remember a single day." Only proof that it happened. Lila studied one photograph, her own face among a crowd, smiling, alive, hand resting on the stranger's arm. "That's not possible," she whispered. Greaves' gaze met hers, hollow and desperate. "Detective," he said. "Nothing in this town has been possible since the clock stopped." That night, Lila replayed the dashcam footage again. This time she watched the seconds she'd missed. Static flickered, and suddenly she saw herself, walking through the square with the stranger. Her laughter echoed faintly through the speaker. They stood beside the fountain as time shimmered around them like heat. "You made me keep it," his voice said softly. Her own hand glowed faintly in the video, the same golden hue as the sand beneath the tower. She looked down at her wrist, her veins pulsed with the same light. The ticking in her ears grew louder. It wasn't coming from the clocks anymore. It was coming from her heart. At dawn, Lila stood again in the square, the world eerily still. The clock tower loomed overhead, its pendulum's rhythm now echoing inside her chest. She could feel every second's movement, an ache behind her eyes, a heartbeat within stone. She understood now. The stranger hadn't been a ghost, but a vessel. And when he vanished, the role had passed to her. Time required a keeper. The town's silence deepened as she whispered to the empty air. "What happens if I stop?" The wind stilled. The sun froze half above the horizon. Lila closed her eyes. Somewhere deep below, the tower began to hum again, answering her question in a single, trembling tick. Lila no longer slept. Each night she sat by her window, listening to the rhythm inside her chest, echo against the ticking of every clock in Marrow's End. When she blinked, she saw moments, fragments of lives happening all at once. Children running through autumn leaves that hadn't fallen yet. Elias repairing a watch that would break tomorrow. Mara painting a sunrise that hadn't come. The weight of time pressed behind her eyes. Every heartbeat felt like a turn of a gear, too large for one soul to carry. She whispered to the darkness, "How do I let it go?" But the air only answered with the faint metallic sigh of moving hands. For the first time, she realized, time didn't serve her. It obeyed her. Elias found her the next morning, standing by the fountain, her reflection flickering like an old film reel. "You're changing," he said quietly. Fear and reverence tangled in his voice. Lila didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the clock tower's face, where the hands trembled, though the bell was still. "I can feel every second slip through me," she murmured. "If I breathe too long, the morning stretches. If I close my eyes, the night jumps ahead." Elias placed a trembling hand on her arm. "Then stop breathing," he said, "just for a moment. See what happens." Lila looked at him with a faint, broken smile. "You don't understand," she whispered. If I stop, so does everything. Mara came to her that evening carrying a new painting, trembling so hard she nearly dropped it. "It's not mine," she said. "It painted itself." Lila took the canvas and felt her stomach twist. It showed her own face dissolving into sand, her hands stretched upward like a marionette's. Behind her, the stranger's faint outline lingered, watching from the distance. "You're fading," Mara whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You're becoming what he was." Lila touched the canvas. Her fingers left glowing trails across the wet paint. "Maybe this is how time keeps itself," she murmured. "Through people it chooses." The painting shivered, colors shifting under her hand as if alive. "Then maybe," Mara said, voice breaking, "you can choose something else." That night, Lila stood before the clock tower again. The pendulum had begun to swing faster on its own, invisible currents pulling it toward collapse. The ticking pounded through her veins. She reached out her hand, and the pendulum stilled. Instantly, the entire town froze. The wind mid-breath, leaves suspended mid-fall. The hum of life paused in reverent silence. She felt it. Power absolute, terrifying, tender. The world was a heartbeat waiting for permission. "Is this what he felt?" she whispered. The golden glow from her chest brightened until her silhouette burned against the stone. "If I keep time," she said softly, "then I can stop it from devouring them." And she began to walk into the tower's open door, each step echoing like thunder in eternity. Inside the tower's heart, Lila placed her hand against the shattered glass pendulum. The golden sand that once filled it began to rise, drawn to her palm in graceful streams. The glow surrounded her like a halo as the gears hummed back to life, steady and slow. She felt the burden settle, each heartbeat aligning with the rhythm of the world. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized the truth. She wasn't meant to stop time or control it. She was meant to carry it, to remember it when it forgot itself. Outside, dawn returned, sunlight bending gently through the clouds. The clocks resumed their ticking. Marrow's End began to breathe again, and for the first time since 3:11, time sounded merciful. The morning after, silence reigned in Marrow's End. Perfect, flawless silence. The clocks had stopped again, but not from chaos. They had simply chosen stillness. Lila awoke to the absence of sound, her heartbeat faint, slow, almost reluctant. When she looked outside, the world hung like a painting. The wind paused in mid-stir, the fog frozen mid-roll. Yet people moved. They walked, breathed, spoke softly in hushed, careful tones as if afraid to wake something greater. Elias found her near the square. "It's not broken this time," he said. "It's listening," Lila frowned. "To what?" He smiled weakly. "To you." Her pulse echoed faintly in the quiet air, each beat rippling through the still world like drops in endless glass. At noon, Mara called from her studio. "Come quickly," she whispered. "You have to see this." When Lila arrived, every clock in the room was frozen. Yet the paintings moved, the brushstrokes shifting like breath. On one canvas, she saw the square filled with townspeople standing in sunlight that hadn't yet arrived. On another, the same people asleep beneath a sky thick with stars. Time was collapsing, every hour folding into itself like pages turning backward and forward at once. "It's showing me what could happen," Mara said softly. "What will if you let go?" Lila reached out, tracing a line of paint where her own figure stood at the clock tower's base. The paint was warm beneath her fingertips, beating like a pulse. By dusk, the air began to hum. Lila stood at the fountain as the townspeople gathered, drawn by instinct rather than reason. Faces turned upward to the tower, waiting. The silence deepened until even thought seemed distant. Then faintly, the bell moved. but did not ring. Lila felt it inside her chest instead, a vibration like the echo of the world's breath. "If it doesn't tick," she whispered, "does time die?" Elias shook his head. "Maybe it rests. Maybe it dreams." For a moment, everything shimmered. The sky, the water, even the faces of those gathered. The world held still, a heartbeat before something beautiful or terrible. Lila exhaled. The clouds began to move again. Night returned, and with it came the stranger's voice, soft, disembodied, carried on the wind that had learned to whisper again. "You've done what I could not," he said. Lila turned, seeing only shadows stretching along the cobblestones. "You're gone," she said. "You gave it to me." The voice trembled like static across the stars. "I was never gone, only waiting to see if time would forgive itself." Lila's heart slowed, steady. The clocks began ticking one by one, not in perfect unison, but in kind. "You've given them choice," the stranger said, "and choice is the first mercy." The voice faded. For the first time, the ticking no longer frightened her. It sounded like breathing. As dawn rose over Marrow's End, the first bird sang again, hesitant and trembling. The clocks chimed softly, each at its own pace, imperfect, human. Lila stood before the tower, listening. Her heartbeat had steadied, no longer leading the rhythm, but walking alongside it. Mara painted from her studio window. Elias opened his shop once more, and the townspeople moved through their day as though learning the world anew. Lila smiled faintly. Time no longer demanded her. It simply included her. She turned toward the horizon where sunlight met fog, whispering, "Rest easy, old friend." The clock tower answered not with a chime, but with a breath, as if the world itself had exhaled at last. The days that followed felt impossibly calm, as though the world itself were catching its breath. Lila watched the town move gently through morning fog. The baker sweeping his steps, children running through mist that glimmered faintly gold. But at night she still heard it, the pulse beneath Marrow's End, the whisper of turning gears. Each night the hum grew fainter, as if time itself were beginning to rest. She climbed the clock tower once more, and stood where the stranger had once stood, looking out over roofs washed in dawnlight. The air was still. The bell hung silent. For the first time, the ticking within her chest matched the steady rhythm of peace. But she knew it couldn't last forever. Something deep within her was winding down. Elias came to her that afternoon, carrying a small, intricate pocket watch, the one that had once ticked backward. "I repaired it," he said quietly, "but it only works if you let it." He placed it in her hand, the metal warm as living skin. "You've kept us safe, Lila. You can rest now." She looked at him, her eyes tired but kind. "If I stop, the clocks may too." Elias smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what we need. A pause that belongs to us, not the tower." She looked down at the little watch, its second hand trembling, waiting. "Then we rest together," she said softly. Elias nodded, the corners of his eyes wet with quiet understanding. That night, Mara visited her with one final painting. The canvas showed the town under a sleeping sky, stars swirling above like the gears of an unseen machine. At its center stood the clock tower, dark and still, surrounded by peaceful faces, Lila among them. "It's not prophecy," Mara said. "It's goodbye." Lila traced the brushstrokes gently. "You painted peace," she murmured. "You gave it form." Mara smiled sadly. "You gave it time." They stood together in the quiet studio, surrounded by every painting that had told their story, the golden dust on the floor shimmering faintly, as though the air itself remembered. When midnight came, Lila returned to the tower. The pendulum hung motionless, the sand within it still and gleaming. She placed the repaired watch beside it, its gentle ticking echoing softly through the chamber. "You've done enough," she whispered to the air, to the stranger, to time itself. The golden light within her chest flickered like a candle nearing its end. "I'll keep one moment," she said. "Just one, where nothing moves and nothing fades." She pressed her hand to the pendulum. The world exhaled. Every clock in Marrow's end stopped, this time without fear, without loss, just stillness, just grace. Morning broke without a sound. The sun rose, yet no clock chimed to mark it. In the square, the fountain's water hung suspended like crystal, and the air shimmered faintly with light. Mara stepped out of her studio, Elias from his shop. They felt it. Not loss, but rest. On the tower's face, the hands pointed forever to 3:11. And beneath it, etched freshly into the stone, were words none of them remembered carving. Time was kept with mercy. The people of Marrow's End lived on, neither fearing nor chasing the hours. Somewhere in that stillness, the faintest heartbeat lingered, slow, steady, and kind. Lila had given them that, a world that finally learned how to pause.